Okay, good evening. And I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the DC chapter of Le Dame de Scoffier. Here we are in beautiful downtown DC. I am Ellen Kassoff, and I'm your moderator for this evening's webinar. I'm a board member of Le Dame de Scoffier and the co-owner of Equinox Restaurant, where we're sitting this evening, which we opened, my husband and I, who is a chef, in 1999. Le Dame de Scoffier, as you know, is a philanthropic organization of women leaders in the fields of food, fine beverage, and hospitality. In our DC chapter, our members are restaurateurs, chefs, caterers, food writers, photographers, winery owners, wine experts, public relations consultants, nutritionists. We represent just about every aspect of food, beverage, and in the hospitality industry. This year, we've tapped the talents of our members to create these free webinars, all exploring some aspect of the industry we love. Tonight, our topic is, so you always wanted to be published. You might have had a long, great book idea, but didn't know how to get it published, where to start. You might have created and refined your recipes and know there's an audience out there somewhere for them. You've traveled to cool locations and you're sure that there's a coffee table book in the making, just waiting with your name on it. History and food are your passions. How do you merge them into a book? We've all had these questions. So this evening, 3 members of our DC chapter will tell you how they make publishing a journey. And they enjoy the journey all the way, don't they? And we're going to share tips, their backstories, from self-publishing to landing a book deal. They've got expertise to share. So let me introduce you briefly, and then we'll start the conversation. Elizabeth Karmel is a chef, cookbook author, food writer, and consultant. Her newest book, Steak and Cake, love that, more than 100 recipes to make every meal a smash hit. She is both America's OG female grilling and barbecue expert and a gifted baker who grew up in the Southern Cake Belt. Her previous books include Taming the Flame, Pizza on the Grill, and Soaked and Slathered and Seasoned. And she's a founding executive chef of New York and Washington, D.C.'s Hill Country Barbecue Market and Hill Country's chicken restaurants, where she developed the menu and the recipes that are still served today. She's Tar Heel born Southern cook and also designs and sells kitchen tools on QVC. Her sold out steak and cake classes on the ICE, the Institute of Culinary Education, were the inspiration for her new book. So welcome, Elizabeth.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
That's a time for an applause. Okay, then we have Jessica van Dop DeJesus, sorry, Jessica. And she's a widely published travel content curator. She's the founder of the popular foodie travel website, The Dining Traveler, and the author of the coffee table book, The Dining Traveler Guide to Puerto Rico. Her writing has been featured in publications such as Travel Channel, Modern Luxury, Washington City Paper, Southern Living, and Telemundo. She was raised in Guayama, sorry, did I get that right? Puerto Rico. She began traveling over 20 years ago as a young Marine. From serving as a translator in the you're gonna have to help me with that one, Jessica.
The Senegalese.
Thank you, countryside, to interviewing chefs in Puerto Rico. She loves learning about cultures, food, and people, and she's traveled to over 50 countries and lived in 6. Welcome, Jessica.
Thank you.
And we have, absolutely, and we have Laura Kumin, and she has a long career as a lawyer before she became an author, teacher, and cooking coach. She's the author of 2 cookbooks that combine history and culture with cooking, illuminating the little-known corners of the historical period of our movement, all stirred up. Suffrage cookbooks, food, and the battle for women's right to vote. What a timely subject. And the Hamilton cookbook, Cooking, Eating, and Entertaining in Hamilton's World. Her books contain original recipes and adapted versions that Laura created so that readers can enjoy dishes from these periods. At her food blog, Mother Would Know, Laura encourages readers to become confident and creative home cooks, something I know we're all doing a lot of these days. So I'll begin. Jessica, if I could start with you. You've written about the flavors of Puerto Rico, and being raised on Puerto Rico food, I'd imagine that fueled your passion for the topic. Can you go a bit more into depth about what specifically about Puerto Rican cuisine makes it publish worthy? And where did you find your hook? Meaning, how did you stand out from other notable Puerto Rican authors such as Tony Rican or Julia de Luisa or Isabel Cruz, Jamie Fritsch? How did you stand out and how did you find your hook for your book?
Well, one of the things that I noticed is that there was not really a coffee table photo travel guide to Puerto Rico. And I mean, there were some that were published like in the 80s or something like that. So I wanted to bring something modern. Social media has really inspired people to travel, to go to new restaurants. And I wanted the photos to tell the story. And of course, we have some captions and intros that dive deeper into each region of the island, but I wanted to give people a virtual trip and inspire them to visit Puerto Rico.
Nice. I like the virtual. We all need those
Yeah,
virtual trips.
I didn't
these
know
days.
that when I published the book that we would all be stuck home. You know?
Exactly. And Laura, this one's for you. You've successfully melded history with cooking, specifically in celebrating the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, which guaranteed women the right to vote in All Stirred Up. And it reveals the new side of history in the suffrage movement. The book incidentally acknowledges familiar images of women's suffrage movement, picket signs, flowers, and women marching through the streets, and demonstrates how much more there really was to the movement. Ever courageous and creative, suffragettes also carried their cause to America's homes through cooking and food. I'd imagine already you have a love for history. So how did you decide to bring these two together to make it relevant for today's cook?
I first found a suffrage cookbook by accident. And when I did, I really felt that I had I had really stumbled on a corner of the suffrage movement that not a whole lot of people know about. And so it was kind of my journey and then my deciding that other people would like to take that journey too. I thought the suffrage movement really deserved a new look.
Okay. And Elizabeth, you have so many unique titles,
Oh.
which I know helps to sell a book and an idea. So you can get the book going, but you got to sell the idea. Your titles like Carolina Q to Go, Girls at the Grill, these are not traditional for ladies who cook or typically are looking on the bookshelf. And your latest book, Steak and Cake, is like no other on the market. So what was your aha moment in bringing that to your publisher?
So the truth of the matter is that I taught for years at the ICE, the Institute of Culinary Education in New York City, and one of my most popular classes was a class that I created called Steak and Cake. And when I created it, I thought, okay, I was going to teach on a Saturday night, and I thought, what can I teach that's not only going to, give them some tips to take home, but it's going to be fun and a Saturday night outing. And I feel like steak and cake is everybody's favorite Saturday night meal. So I was like, perfect. I'll teach a class called Steak and Cake. And for me, I'm a writer. I've always been a writer. And so I love to play with words. And so even the titles of my classes, I wanted them to be playful. And because cooking is, something to learn how to do, but it's also fun and it's about community and it's about celebration. And so that class became a runaway hit. And more than that, the crazy thing is I would get people who had never bought a steak, never cooked a steak, never baked a cake. They were scared to do it into my class. And it was a hands-on class. And I would go around the room and I'd ask everybody, what is it that made you take this class? Because I wanted to make sure that they got out of it, what they came to get out of it. And so many people were so afraid of baking a cake or cooking a steak. And you could see it in their body language. Like they'd be all hunched over and they'd be afraid to talk. And then 3 hours later, after they had done this themselves, made their, cooked a steak, baked their first cake, they were walking tall. They were so excited. And I could just see what it did to people's self-esteem. And I know that sounds corny, but it is the truth. And then they text me pictures of what they were making at home, and they continued to cook and bake. And like everybody needs a point of departure. And so that class was such a joyous point of departure with so many people that I thought, I have to put this in a book.
Exactly.
That's
Well,
it.
that leads to a great point, is that as authors, I know we can all sort of get juju from the energy of something like a class or a travel, even an Instagram page, that you get so much great feedback in, and that's where your aha moment comes from. Maybe the first time that you get that feedback from them, maybe an unintended audience. And I know for myself, we got our book was published by an article that Joan Nathan wrote in the New York Times. So these things can always become books from something else, like a cooking class or a travel journey or being an attorney who knows her history really well. So I just want to ask each of you if you can remember all the way back. So if we're talking to first-time authors out here, people who've never had anything published and they would really love to start, and they have all these great ideas in their brain. So much like Elizabeth, Jessica, if you could jump back to that very first time you were published and just give us a quick rundown of just like what the tipping point was for you.
I
The
have a
first
pretty
time.
unconventional story because The Dining Traveler Guide to Puerto Rico is my first book, and I started blogging 10 years ago on Blogger, so an OG blogger, like on the Blogger platform.
That's so
And
OG.
that's how I built my platform. And then with social media, I built an audience that way, started writing for some other outlets on top of my blog. So I already had an established
But
group
what
of
was it
people that
about
were,
your blog that what
Mhm.
were followers following in those very OG days of
Yes.
Blogger? What was it that you were doing that started to make you realize, wow, I have an audience?
Yeah, I first started blogging when I lived in Belgium, and my friends kept on asking me like, "What are you doing there?" And so I was like, I might as well put it all on a blog, and instead of having to write all these separate emails, I'm like, "Hey, here's the link," and it actually started getting a following in the expat circles in Belgium and Holland, and then when I moved back to the States, I wanted to continue to write about my experience, and a lot of it always ended up being about food and travel. So I then
So were you writing
streamlined
about
it.
Belgium back then, or were you writing about Puerto Rico?
No, I was writing mostly about living in
Ah,
Belgium. It was Adventures
okay.
of a Puerto Rican Girl in Brussels was the name of the
Awesome.
blog.
Great. It's great.
Yes.
It's really
But
great.
but one of the things, even though I grew up in Puerto Rico, left when I was 14 years old, I always continued to go back to the island. My parents were always very in touch with our culture. That was a big part of us growing up. I went back when I was in college to Puerto Rico to study there for a bit. And one of the things that I noticed that was in traditional travel media, there were stories about Puerto Rico, but not written by Puerto Rican authors. So if you were reading an article in Condé Nast or Travel and Leisure, and I would pitch and never hear anything back. So I took matters into my own hands and decided to come up with my book.
Nice. And Laura, so you mentioned that you had found a book. Well, actually, let's go back to your very first publishing, whether it was an article or a blog or an actual book. What was your tipping point moment where you realized, hey, there might be an audience for this?
Well, actually, I have a sort of maybe unusual story in that I started blogging because I was going to write a book for my kids and their friends. And then I discovered that they don't really read cookbooks or look for advice in books. They go online if they want something. So I said, okay, I'll start a blog. And I knew nothing about blogging, but how
But
hard
did
could
you know
it
you were
be?
writing?
So I just started, and that was the beginning. The Hamilton cookbook was actually not my idea. I mean, I had a different idea, and I went around and tried to pitch it to bunches of people. Nobody was interested in my idea. And about 18 months after I had sort of given up, I got this email from someone I had pitched to who said, "Do you remember me? And I have this idea and a publisher, but we don't have anyone to write this book. And you would be the perfect person." And I was sort of like, whoa, that's interesting.
Right.
And it sort of went from there. I mean, All Stirred Up was my idea, but what I realized was sometimes you just have to let fate take you where it
Yes.
wants to go,
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
and it turned out one of the pieces of advice that I would give to someone who's looking for a book deal for their first idea is sometimes you can't be wedded to the particular idea. You just want to get published, and then it will then other things can happen. But it's sort
Well,
of
and
chicken
that
and
brings
egg. You know,
that brings up a lot of times publishers know what sells more than we do. So
Right.
they sort of want to fit you into that box.
Or you find out that they're not interested in the idea, but they're interested in you. And they have an idea, or they have somebody who has a concept and they don't like the person as the writer, but they do like the concept. And before you know it, you might be doing something very different from what you originally intended.
So, so I think the takeaway from what you're saying is to make yourself just as sellable as your ideas.
I guess so. Yeah.
And Elizabeth, back to that very first time you were published, what was that aha moment for you where you realized, wow, there might be a market for this?
Well, my stories, my very first book was published in 2005. It was called Taming the Flame: Secrets to Hot and Quick Grilling and Low and Slow Barbecue. And what happened really was that behind the scenes, I was teaching writers and editors and chefs how to grill and barbecue. I was teaching them techniques that they didn't know. So I wasn't teaching them about flavors per se, because, you know, chefs had their own flavors, but I was teaching them about how to use an outdoor grill as an alternate heat source. And because of that, I sort of, in the inside world, you know, got a reputation for being an expert in grilling and barbecue. And I had this idea that if I could get women to embrace a gas grill so that it wasn't messy, that I could start women, embracing a grill as an everyday cooking appliance. And so I started a website before there were blogs. I probably started one of the first or second non-corporate cooking websites in the universe. It was called Girls at the Grill. It's still up there. And because of that, there was quite a splash. And I really wanted to write my first cookbook called Girls at the Grill. And what happened was that, similar to what Laura is saying, I had a number of publishers who wanted to work with me, but they wanted me to write a general grilling book, not a book just geared towards women, because of course that was a new thing and they thought they would lose some market. So which was actually fabulous for me, not to be pigeonholed just, women grilling. But I never let Girls at the Grill go. I still have that website. And even in the early days of Girls at the Grill, 60% of the people who came to the website were women and 40% were men. So men always came to Girls at the Grill, even though it was written in a very,
they might have thought it was something else. Just kidding.
Fashion.
No.
Listen, you know what? It's the one time where I have to say that the men asked more questions than the women. But I think that, people were looking for information. They were looking for someone to hold their hand in the backyard. And, I was there to do it and just give them some pretty straight information. And the thing that nobody thought about really was to take their indoor cooking knowledge outdoors. And that's really what I did. And so I created all of these outdoor cooking techniques that were really based on indoor cooking techniques, because heat is heat.
That's for sure. So I think the takeaway here is flexibility, ladies, that we would give will be authors out there is to be flexible, because we know from a business point of view, we might have an idea that we're just absolutely in love with, but a publisher is like, no, I don't think it's going to sell. So we're sort of at the mercy of, doing what a publisher wants you to do on a more mass scale. But then there's also self-publishing. And Jessica, I'm going to get to some questions in a minute, but Jessica, I think that self-publishing is a much more viable option these days than it used to be. And it used to be traditionally, we had to take our ideas, find an agent, find a publisher, get rejected 500 times. Whereas with the advent of Blogger, like you say, and it seems that all of you got started with great websites, blogging, and social media accounts. So Jessica, what would you say versus that less traditional path, but much more popular these days of self-publishing and where one could get started there?
I think it all depends, right? So my book, it was self-published. I actually used Kickstarter to get the few, the first, investment in. And Laura was actually one of my backers. Thank you, Laura.
All right.
and and it was great because I think it also it was a good marketing tool because I was able to pitch to press, hey, I'm doing this Kickstarter campaign. So I did a few TV interviews about it and got some people involved, got my audience involved in it. And we were able to pre-sell over 200 books. So it gave us the cash that we needed to create the content.
Yep.
And I think that for me, I wanted to create something that was of me, that I wasn't influenced, especially because it's something so personal to me, talking about the place that I grew up, where my heritage, my family is from, and I didn't want to be influenced by a publisher. But I think that one of the learning things was that, we raised $20,000, but however, we probably spent, now I would say around $25,000 more.
Wow.
So $45,000, because our book is not print on demand. So a lot of people think, when they think self-published, they think, oh, this is just like a little book I have on Amazon and
Right.
demand. But for us, the quality, I'm just going to show it really quick because it's like a hardcover book and there's like embossing in the back. So there's like a lot of details to the book.
High production value.
Colors of the Caribbean and Puerto Rico are very vibrant. We had very specifics on what we wanted the paper to be for the images to really pop out. So that cost a little bit more. We printed the book in Italy. Thankfully, my husband's a logistician, so he was able to like ship the books really cheap to the States. So these are all little things that, you're so, especially as a creative person, you're so wrapped up in the creative process that also being self-published is a business unit probably of your bigger brand.
Can you distinguish really quick for me the difference between having an agent and being self-published? Are they the same thing? Do you need an agent? If you're, one of the questions from panelists is about having an agent, which we'll get to in a minute, but just Jessica, for you real quick, along those lines, were you representing yourself or did you have an agent at this time?
I didn't have an agent for the book, but when I did publish the book, I did hire a publicist to help me get the word out and for the book tour.
Okay. And Laura, let me ask you, and we do have a general question for all of you, and I'll start with you, Laura. Do you have an agent, and what tips can writers do to secure an agent if you are going to go out and search? What was your story like with your agent?
Well, I do have an agent. I think my story is fairly typical, which is that you query is the term they use. You
Yes.
query a lot of agents. You basically don't hear from most of them. And then you get a little interest from, maybe a couple, and someone really,
So it's like cold calling.
it's interesting. And one of the tips I would give is that if you have friends who have agents, part of what is so difficult is getting an agent's attention. And if you can have a friend introduce you to their agent, it makes a world of difference. I mean, it's not a guarantee by any means, but you're sort of at the head of a long line of
door
people.
open. And Elizabeth, for you, did you start out, do you have the same agent? Did you start out with one? What was your journey like to finding an agent?
So I have had agents and I have not had agents, and I currently don't have an agent. And I'm kind of unique in the sense that I know a lot of people in the publishing business, and so for me, I didn't necessarily have to have an agent, but I have some advice for if you don't know a lot of people in the publishing world, and because I'm that friend that would introduce you to an agent, or someone in the publishing world. That my best advice, and I certainly did this at the very beginning when I was thinking about getting an agent, is find your favorite cookbooks, the books that you like the absolute best, and read the acknowledgments and get the names of the agents and
Smart.
also the editors from the acknowledgments. The acknowledgments will give you a lot of information.
Yes. Now, along those lines, Laura, and this is on my list of questions to ask as well tonight, the query. Just can you give us a 20-second, 30-second overview of what goes into a query and for advice for people out there who want to get started with a query letter? How?
Well, just like, Elizabeth was saying, look at books. I would say, look at books about getting an agent and find the one that really speaks to you. And then there are forms for query letters. And, you write one, which is, it has to grab you in the beginning and it has to have certain kinds of information in it. But I would also say that showing whatever you do to the largest number of people you're comfortable with and getting not just pats on the back about what a great writer you are, but getting the quizzical looks like, really? What did you mean by that? Or, wow, that's odd. Or, I love the idea, but, that all helps because believe me, right out of the gate, you're not necessarily where you're going to end up. And I would say that agents, you never know what's going to attract an agent, but if you send something you've written to 10 people and 8 of them tell you it's wonderful, you might have something. But if, 6 of them are expressing some level of concern, maybe you need to go back and rework it.
Got it. Okay. Jessica, I have just one more. So now that we've discussed the traditional publishing route as well as the self-publishing route, if you were to go back and do it all over again, which path would you choose?
I would still, as painful as it is, I would still choose self-publishing.
And Laura, same question.
I think I would choose either of the ways that I've done it, which is to go with a publisher who doesn't take from agents, who just works directly, or go with an agent, but a more traditional route. And I would describe myself in saying that as not being as courageous as Jessica, okay? Because there's a lot to self-publishing that you really have to be brave.
Right. Elizabeth, I'll bat that one to you too.
I would be open to self-publishing or again working with a traditional publisher. The beauty of self-publishing is that you have control over the product, and you don't always have 100% control over the product when you're writing with a traditional publisher. But you have to front all the money. You have to find a distributor. You have to do everything. This is now not only your creation, but your business, right?
Yes.
However, for people who really want to publish a book and really have an idea that they think is great, I will tell you, I have more than one friend who couldn't get a book deal, self-published, and then they did such a great job with their self-published book that big publishers came to them and said, hey,
yes,
you want to write a book for us? So, I mean,
nothing says success like success.
Right. Exactly. I was just going to say those exact words.
Well, and I think there's often a big part of you that, like you're saying, control over your product, that, hey, I'm the one writing this. I understand you're the publisher, but this is what I want to write about. And there's always that push me, pull you kind of thing. But I think now more than ever, it is easier to self-publish, but it takes a Herculean amount of work as well. But the payoff can be great. So I completely have been down both roads. And I also wanted to talk about, like, my beginning was, from an article in a food section. And there's also a question about this too. Many great books do come from a sole article in a food section or newspaper or a guest blog post or something like that. So Jessica, I'll ask you, how do you get published, or where do you begin to start to get published in the food section of a great metro paper or a guest blog site? What is your process there?
Sorry. Pitch. And I cannot stress that enough. I think a lot of people, they'll pitch once and give up, and you just have to.
Tell us, I'm going to back you up for 1 second. Sorry to interrupt, but when you say pitch, I think sometimes these things are understood to us, but to
Okay.
pretend like you're speaking to someone who's never written a pitch letter, never written a query letter before, and they just trying to get started. So what's a pitch letter?
Sending your idea for an article, for a story, like Elizabeth was saying about the acknowledgements, which that's a great idea. Thank you for sharing that. But also the same, when you look at the bylines, maybe you read the story, oh, I really like it. Oh, who wrote it? So-and-so. Maybe start following that person on social media, engaging with them. Start following the editors, see what kind of stories they're looking for, and get their emails, and just but I
Start
think
a list.
yes, and I think that nowadays is with social media, things are more accessible than ever, and it's following like a lot of these folks and commenting on their articles, on their photos, like, and then people are like, oh, that's Jessica who follows me or comments on my articles, like, and they can now put one and one together.
So we could answer that question in that engagement online, especially these days, is just as important maybe as your pitch and leading up
Yes.
to your pitch. Now, just for mechanical sake, how long would you suggest a pitch be? 2 paragraphs or an entire 8 by 11.5 sheet of paper?
That was like one of my mistakes when I first started, is that I would send the whole article, and they're like, no, we don't want the whole article. Like, that's a waste of time. Thankfully, I had my blog. I could put them on my blog. And that's also a good thing, to start is, there's like a lot of smaller blogs and websites that are looking for contributors. Maybe your first article won't be, in a big publication, but maybe write for a smaller publication, set up your own website. So at least your work is out there. And if an editor doesn't know you, you can say, hey, I write for
them.
or here's not only my clippings, but here's my website. And you can see, because I think that now is not only turning in a paper, but some people that I work with, like, they want images. So learn how to take good pictures. Some of them, some people don't know how to work different content management systems. So having your own website trains you to deal with those things.
Excellent. So that would be a first great step, is to just get on Squarespace or something like that and establish your own website. And this brings up a really good point, and it's a point I think for everyone and anyone who's been published in any way, and that's intellectual rights. Like, you're maybe not published, and this is also one of our part of a question that I want to expand upon, and I want to punt that to you, Laura, in that how do you protect yourself? Because I think in the process you're giving up a lot of really good information, and sadly there are people who would like to poach off that a little bit. So how do you protect your intellectual capital? And thank you for the great question out there, and it really leads into what Jessica was saying. If you make a mistake and send the whole article, and next thing you know, some assignment editor gives it to somebody else, like, wait a minute, I had steak and cake idea. What are you talking about? So how do you protect yourself along the way? Because I would imagine you have a lot of historical content going into your articles and your queries and things like that, along with food, which is such a unique position. So could you address that for us?
Well, right. First off, you would always copyright a book. I mean,
but prior to that, I'm saying to.
Even blogs are copyrighted. But the fact of the matter is that recipes themselves cannot be copyrighted. And there's a big difference between owning intellectual property and actually being able to protect it.
I guess it's more the ideas that you're trying to protect than the actual recipe itself. But
I think, a lot of it is kind of a handshake. That is that when you send out a query letter, or when you talk to somebody about your idea, you may want to do a non-disclosure agreement. Certainly, for example, I've recipe tested, and I had a wonderful baker who's very, very well known and wrote a beautiful book. She sent me this incredible thing written by her father, a lawyer, before she sent me the recipe to test. It was kind of funny. And, she was cute about it, but it was, she wanted to protect her ideas and that recipe.
Sure.
Which is fine,
Well, I think also what I hear you saying is that there's ethics involved, and maybe to the point of like, how to protect yourself is maybe to make sure you know who you're sending your work to, and that it's a reputable person or organization that you trust, that you have this great idea for a book. So maybe you need to do a little research, we could say, before, if you're nervous that you have such an earth-shattering idea and you're very scared to get it out there, but you have to get it out there in order to get it published. Maybe do a little research on the people you're sending it to as well, because there is some ethics among publishers. I know that's there are ethics out there.
Well, and that's one of the functions of an agent, is to protect you and to send it only to publishers that they're comfortable with. Obviously, if you deal directly with a publisher, you have to know something about the ethics of that publisher. The other thing I would say is, you really want to understand who you're dealing with and what you have and whether it's unique.
Absolutely.
I mean, there are some things, unfortunately, that can't be protected. You might think you have a unique idea, but there's not a whole
Chances
lot
are
there.
someone else has had it too. I don't know about steak and cake though.
Right.
It's just so cool.
Well,
Elizabeth.
and Steak and Cake is a great title, but titles are not copyrightable.
Right.
But it's a fabulous title, Elizabeth, and I'm immediately going to go and look for it.
I know. As soon as I saw it, I was intrigued. Well, Elizabeth, for you, sorry, go ahead, please, go ahead.
Well, I just want to add to that, and this is not, this is a controversial, but I think that anyone who really wants to be published has to understand that that people steal recipes all the time. They may change 3 ingredients. They may not even change the ingredient. They change the quantity of the ingredient. And probably, Laura, the reason that person had an NDA drawn up by her father was because it happened so often in our business, and she was trying to protect herself legally.
Right.
Well, and one way you can check if people are stealing a recipe, honestly, is to cut and paste the entire recipe and put it into Google search. And if it's out there, it'll come up of who has perhaps taken, but to your point, Elizabeth, yeah, it's
well, but
that.
So, and many of my recipes, like the things that were wow, look what I created, that really were unusual and whatever, have been, have been sort of taken and assumed by somebody else. And the attitude that I have is that if I put it out there in the public domain, I have to expect for this to happen, and I can't be upset. I have to take this as a backhanded compliment that people love it so much that now they've taken it into their own repertoire and they can't even remember where they first got it because it's become part of them. Wow. And I kind of think if you think about it in that way, then that protects you from getting bitter and angry, and because there is
flattery and
anger in this business. I mean, I just finished The Man Who Ate Too Much. I don't know if anybody has read that, but that's John Birdsall's book on James Beard. Mm-hmm. And how many years ago was that? It was, it was 3 lifetimes ago, and the same issues were happening, right. He was discussing them, and Julia Child was discussing them, and MFK Fisher was discussing them. So, in some ways you're like, wow, that makes me feel great. It's always been there. And in other ways you're like, wow, this is a problem in this industry because it's always been a problem in this industry.
Yes. Well, it's also like rock and roll. There's only 7 great riffs, and literature, right. It's only a few themes. So kind of in that same boat. Laura, I do have a question for you. When is your next historical cookbook?
Well, I have an idea, but I need to finish launching this one first.
Don't tell it. Don't tell anyone. No, just kidding.
The other thing I would say, what Elizabeth has is not specific recipes, but a great idea. And what Jessica has are not, specific places in Puerto Rico. She doesn't own a description of a place, but she has an idea about how to present things. And so that's really what you're looking to kind of get out there as being yours.
Right. Well, own it and get on it and flaunt it. All right, next question, and I did want to get into this as well, is co-authorship. Do any of you, have you ever, do you now, are you planning on working with a co-author? Elizabeth, go.
Yes. So my number one book by sales volume is a book called Pete's on the Grill. And I wrote it with a very good friend of mine. His name is Bob Bloomer. And it actually was so popular that we wrote 2 editions. And it still is selling like hotcakes. And
Wow.
I remember when the first one came, 2009. That's 11 years ago. And
Wow.
anyway, the best thing about working with somebody that you have a commonality with is that it really made the book was better than either one of us could have done alone.
Okay, power of 2. Laura,
Right.
have you ever had a co-author or plan on having one, or any experiences there you want to share?
I haven't worked with a co-author. I would love to, but
Okay. Hear that, all you budding want to be published folks out there?
Yeah.
Get in touch with Laura. No, you're gonna get a flood of emails to her.
Not to worry.
Okay, Jessica, have you ever worked with sorry, I'm trying not to make a reflection. My glasses, guys. Have you worked with a co-author? And I could tell you a little story about mine at some point if you want to know.
Not for my book. My photographer Italo and I, we were very, he was he's not the co-author, but he did take probably like 80% of the images in the book. So I kind of give him a little bit of that credit. But ultimately I had the last say when it came to content.
I'll say this: I slept with my co-author the whole time. What are you gonna do? And we're still having fun. For those of you who don't know, it's my husband. Okay. Okay, so we've covered a lot there. I do want to know essays. Maybe that's also back to that first kind of query thing. Personal essays, did that ever lead to your journey? Like, I think Jessica would be a great one for you when you were way back when in Europe. There's essay is a really different format, and essays can also turn into wonderful books. And it's a very different format for a cookbook, as is historical content. Very different for, the traditional cookbook. And I think more of what you do with traveling and things like that is kind of an essay. So how would you take the format of an essay, perhaps, and suggest that people use that as a starting point?
What's funny is that I actually published my first, for another website other than my website, for Philly Inquirer, my first official essay in the first person about feeding my daughter during a pandemic. And I have thought about doing a book about my experience living in Europe, but that's, my husband tells me sell this one first. And
right.
But I not in my personal story, but I do know a lot of people. I actually met her in Paris before she became famous. Lindsay Tramuta. I don't know if you guys are familiar with her, but she has a very popular book about Paris, the New Paris, and I think she just released a new book. But she started doing that personal essays about her life in Paris, and I mean, she's been published in the Times. 2 books with big publishers. So I think that, if you do have an interesting personal story, there's something there.
Right, definitely. Okay, and then Laura, this is such a question for you. I gotta go there. Research. How much time, are you devoting to the research of, again, we're speaking with an audience that is wanting to become published. So let's talk from that point of view. How much time would you suggest or advise people to spend researching, their topic versus researching, if they're going to write about cooking, the recipes? How does research take up that pie? How much time devoted, and how do you start?
Well, there are different kinds of research, and the first kind of research you have to do when you get an idea is to find out if anybody else has had that idea. And you really do have to, sort of scour the online resources to figure out, not if somebody's done the same book, But if the idea is already out there, and what was the reception, and do you have a different take on it? And, you know, once you get into the book itself and the recipes themselves, you're never going to get rich with a book, I don't think.
That is definitely one of our questions that I need to get to is,
Yeah, okay.
are you going to make a living on this?
No.
Good.
I mean, the answer is,
straight up.
I don't know. Elizabeth, do you have a different experience?
Well, the way I like to answer that question is Marion Cunningham, who was, one of the first big cookbook authors in the United States, and she was actually James Beard's assistant. She said way back when, you can starve writing cookbooks for a living.
I like it. Until you do the test recipes, but you got to have the money to buy the ingredients, right?
Well, and the other thing is, for example, the research that went into my book, you don't want to calculate that how much you made on an hourly basis, because you're going to cry.
Right.
This is not about, hitting
This
the
is
big time.
For
Believe
love and
me.
passion.
Yeah. A book is a labor of love. And I also like to say it's a very expensive business
Hobby.
card.
I was going to say it's a great gift because you're always looking
It's
at
a
something,
business card.
and you have
It's a great
50
way to-
cases of books in your basement, and you're going to a dinner party, and
Right.
It's a
Save your
great way
trip
to
to-
open doors.
it is a great way to open doors. I agree. Well, Jessica, this has been something on my mind. I wanted to get to you about this. I hear this word content creator thrown around so much these days, and I really did my own research, and I think there's a big difference between a content creator and an author. And I feel that one is much more legit than another one. One seems to have more of a commercial feel to it. Then could you address the difference between being a content creator and an author?
I think you can be both, right? I'm both. And I think the content creator is a person that does a little bit of everything. I mean, in my case, I'm a writer, but I'm also a photographer. No, I'm producing videos. So digital content is a huge spectrum of things. There are people building podcasts. So if you're not specifically a writer, but you have this wide spectrum of things that you're involved in, just writing content creators, just a more easy, all-encompassing title.
Well, tell us the difference of what you think is the different, like if you were to define content creator and author, what would you say are the two differences?
Well, authors, to me, is somebody that has published something longer than an article. You can say the author of the story, but when I see somebody identifying themselves as an author, my automatic thought is, oh, this person wrote a book. At least that's my personal opinion. But for example, I see somebody like Laura, who I know personally. To me, she's an author and a content creator because she does have her blog and she does photograph and she does write for other outlets.
Got it. Great. Thanks. Elizabeth, can you address university presses? Are you familiar with them? And is that a good way to go about getting a cookbook published? And that was a question from one of our audience members. Thank you, Paula.
There's some university presses that have gotten into cookbooks, like the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Mm-hmm. They've done a whole series of single subject ingredient cookbooks. And so I think that what you have to do is you have to look at each individual university press and see what kinds of things that they publish in the food realm. If you have a memoir that's interesting and that is, sort of you grew up in that area and it pertains to sort of the culture and the history of that area, I think a university press would be a great place to go. So that is probably more specific than any other kind of publisher.
I hear you saying local.
Yeah.
It's in vogue again. And I do have a question I'll throw out there. Each of you, if you could just give me a name or two, are there, from Paula Hollerback, is there any particular recipe and cooking blogs that you especially enjoy? Start with you, Laura.
Well, purely for recipes, I happen to love Simply Recipes.
Okay, I'm writing that down.
Because they work. I mean, Elise Bauer, she has since sold the site, but the recipes are, you can look for a very simple variation on whatever is your classic, I mean, name it, cornbread, fish chowder, whatever it is you want to make. And there's a version on Simply Recipes.
Jessica?
Well, specifically for Puerto Rican food, I like a website called The Noshery, especially when I'm trying to get a recipe from my mom and she's not giving me like exact measurements. Like it's good to go.
Oh, she's a mother.
Yes. And now I'm that mother. I'm like, no, just throw a little bit of here and a little bit of there. But The Noshery, and she does a little bit of everything, but her main thing is Puerto Rican food.
Got it. And of course, Elizabeth, throwing that one to you too.
Okay. I do think that Simply Recipes is reliable for a large, corporately owned website. So I think that's a good place to start. I adore the recipes that David Leibowitz puts on his blog, which is I think now just called David Leibowitz. It used to be called A Sweet Life in Paris.
Right.
And he was one of the original bloggers as well.
Okay.
And he has more of a website. I love his sensibility.
Got it. Personally, one of my favorite sites to visit these days are the sites where you can type in the ingredients that you already have. I'm a big proponent of not wasting food. And you can type in the ingredients that you already have on hand and it spits out a couple recipes. And there's like myfridge.com or Recipeland. There's a bunch of them, but I think that's a really interesting, I know it's not generated by a cookbook author per se, but I think that we all have made a lot of recipes where we have leftover stuff in the fridge and we don't know what to do with it because you bought it for one specific recipe. And it's great to get online and these sites you can literally type in 3 to 20 ingredients and it comes up with what to cook for it. I have a question from Miranda. I don't know if Miranda's in the UK or here, but she wants some advice for someone from the UK to get a book or wanting to publish a book in the United States. Anyone want to have any advice for overseas publishing or to get noticed here in the US?
Well, I like what Elizabeth said, which is, she should look at the books by British authors that have been published here. Look at who's publishing them, who are the agents, how are they getting here? And that's, those are paths that have been trod before. So it's good to know how people did it successfully before you, and maybe there'll be something there for you.
Yes.
Right. And there are also a lot of publishing companies that are represented globally.
Mm-hmm.
So you can publish in London, but have it distributed in the United States. That's particularly true with Canadian publishers. There are a lot of, almost every book that's published in Canada also comes to the US.
Got it. Well, we have just a few more minutes left, so I would like to first say thank you, ladies, so much. And I'm going to ask one more lightning round question here, because let's suppose we all got our books published. Here they are, they're going to market, and we're really excited. What's the marketing process like? If you think down the road and you got your vision board and your book is loaded up in cases that you're driving around everywhere, and from book tours to social media. Jessica, we'll start with you. Give me a sentence on post-publishing marketing.
Post.
Really
post all the time. No, and I say it because every time I post about the book, I get a sale in, and you think, oh, I'm going to post once and everybody's going to see it, and the way the algorithms work, or it takes people to see something 7 times before they buy it. So do not stop.
Good one. I like it. Laura?
I would say go in every direction you can possibly go and talk to everyone you know who has done any kind of marketing. Because when you get as many perspectives as you possibly can, there'll be ideas in there that you didn't think of, but that really fit with who you are. And you'll use them and they'll be successful.
Excellent. Elizabeth?
Well, first of all, the marketing for your book is 100% up to you. That's just the way it is in book publishing, or at least 95% up to you. And I say carry one with you everywhere. And don't be afraid to give books to people as a thank you, because they'll be so thrilled. I mean, you know, the person who cuts your hair, or, you know, somebody who, you know, walks your dog, or, you know, they'll be so excited that they met the author and the author gave them a book and signed it, that they're going to tell everybody.
I think the attitude of gratitude is definitely has a big part. I know that it's very exciting when my husband and I, or whoever, we walk into a house that we're even just catering at, and I see our cookbook in their bookshelf. Nothing makes me happier. Like, oh, thank you so much, you bought our book. It's just gratitude. And ladies, that's how I feel about our talk this evening. I'm very grateful for you to be here and give us your time tonight. And please keep checking us out on Le Don d'Escoffier International, National, Local DC chapter. It's an amazing, amazing group of women, and we do a lot out there, from scholarships to informal chats like this. So please stay tuned for the next exciting adventures. And I've had a great time, and I really appreciate you coming.
This was fun.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Take care.
Bye.